Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I have gained a substantial amount of subscribers since my video on Saturday, so I just want to go ahead and extend a warm welcome to all of you new subscribers. I am so happy to have you as part of our family, and I want to say a huge thank you to the subscribers that have been with me for a while now. You guys are the reason why this channel is growing so fast, and I appreciate you so much for it. If you're old or if you're new, go ahead and turn on my notifications for this channel so you are immediately notified when I post a new video. I post every Wednesday and Saturday. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and check out all of my social media sites. I have been giving sneak peeks into these videos on random social media sites that I decide on at the day that the video goes live, so you can kind of get a sneak peek into what my video is going to be about. Yeah, now to just go ahead and jump straight into today's video, because this one is going to be a long one, to say the least. This might end up being one of my longest videos. It's probably going to be so long that I almost considered doing a part 1 today and a part 2 on Saturday, and then I figured you guys would probably want to chop my head off. So I decided I was just going to pack it into a big old long video, which should be exciting for you guys because my missing persons cases are my biggest videos on this channel, and I don't normally do them on Wednesdays, so here's a nice little midweek help you through hump day video to get you through till Saturday. This was a very highly requested video. I've been following this for a very, very long time. It is hands down one of the largest and most well-known missing persons cases, and that is the case of Natalee Holloway. And I know you guys know that I don't normally post a lot of videos on very well-known missing persons cases because they get a ton of coverage already from media and people just already knowing about them. So I tend to stick to the smaller ones because they deserve a little bit more attention sometimes. But this one was very important for me to make because I am so familiar with this case, and because it is like the epitome of why I started this channel. So this one's going to be long, and I'm just going to warn everyone, it's very confusing, very confusing, so you probably will have to watch this video 1 if not 2 times to really gather a lot of this information. All of the small things being ignored, I feel like, are almost the reason why this case is where it's at today, and so this is going to be packed full of a ton of small information to help you guys put it all together. I am so sorry. I'll try to talk as slow and be as brief as I can with certain things, but this is going to be confusing, and I just wanted to warn you now because it's crazy. So Natalee Holloway was from Mountain Brook, Alabama, and she had just recently graduated from high school. She was a very well-known girl. So on May 26, 2005, Holloway and 124 fellow graduates went on a graduation trip down to Aruba in the Caribbean. So 124 of these teenagers were taken with 7 chaperones, which I know a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, 7's nowhere near enough for 124 people, but keep in mind, these kids were all pretty much 17, 18 years old. They were, for the most part, able to take care of themselves, and these chaperones were more of a precaution than anything. So on May 30th, the group was set to leave. It was a fairly short trip, except Natalee never showed up for her plane ride, and once they started really backtracking and revisiting what had happened the night before, a lot of people became extremely concerned. So being a graduation party, you guys already know, things got a little bit wild and crazy. The group was known for partying. They were all known for drinking in excess. The Holiday Inn that they stayed at actually told the group and the chaperones that none of them were welcome there again after the trip was over. They were just excited. They were typical teenagers just trying to enjoy the fact that they just graduated and are taking a new step in their life. So they frequented a place called Carlos and Charlie's. It was this bar, restaurant, nightclub type of deal, and they had already gone there a couple of nights, so on the last night they decided for their last hurrah, that's where they would go again. The last 2 people that Natalee was seen with is Joran Sloot, and forgive me if I say these wrong, but Deepak and Satish Kaupo, and that was the group of guys that she was last seen with. Around 1:30 a.m. she was seen getting into the vehicle with these 3 men, which didn't alarm any of the friends she was with, only because they had seen her with the same group, or at least Vandersloot, A couple other times in the casino. They weren't really concerned about it. At this point, they kind of knew these guys and they assumed she had just gotten a ride back to the hotel. So when she didn't return for her flight, a couple of students wanted to stay back, the chaperones, a couple of them wanted to stay back, the family was notified, and pretty much all hell broke loose. They almost instantly knew something had to have gone wrong because she would not have been late for her flight. She would not have gone back to her hotel room, so everyone was on really high alert already. Hundreds of volunteers in Aruba and a bunch of people from the United States immediately came down and did this very extensive search. So not only did they do a land search on foot, they also had scuba divers go and check all the surrounding waters looking for her. Aruban banks raised over $20,000 to help aid all of the people that were searching for her. There was a pretty massive effort in attempts to find her. I know that there were a couple of infrared planes that flew over. They were desperate to find Natalie because she was not turning up anywhere. Obviously, the first place that they looked was at Joran and Deepak and Satish because they were the last people that she was seen with, and this is where I get very upset and angry and a ridiculous chain of events starts to unfold. So at first, Sloot claimed he had absolutely never heard the name Natalee Holloway before. He stuck to a story for a very long time that he absolutely had no knowledge of the name whatsoever, and then all of a sudden he goes, oh yeah, you know, I kind of remember me, Deepak, and Satish took her over to the California lighthouse at this beach by the Marriott Hotel, and she said she wanted to see sharks. We hung out a little while and then we returned her back to her hotel around 2 a.m. Already this kind of gives me a red flag because that would give them 30 minutes to get in the car, take themselves somewhere, see these sharks, and then come back, have her back to her hotel. I don't really see that time frame possibly allowing all of that to happen. He also said that as she exited the car to go to the hotel that she stumbled and fell down, almost as if he was trying to create this story of her being extremely intoxicated. And then he said that when they were driving away, he noticed a man walk up to her, a very tall and dark-skinned man wearing a black shirt like one a security guard would wear. He went from not knowing her name to knowing very bizarre and noticing strange details of a story that he was saying was actually what happened. So Natalie's family came down. Natalie's mother was given housing. She was originally, ironically enough, put in the same room Natalie had been in the Holiday Inn, and then got extremely upset over this and was sent to another hotel. The whole family was treated very well by the Aruban government, and this definitely comes into play later. A ton of leads were immediately taken, and every single one led to a dead end. And there was actually a sample of what they thought was blood taken out of Deepak's car that turned out to not be. But what that does say to me is that they did follow the leads of Sloot and Deepak and Satish, and it all pretty much came up with nothing. They even arrested 2 security guards that had been in the area at the time, and the basis of this was essentially what Sloot had told them, that someone who looked like a security guard had approached her after they dropped her off at the hotel, and yet again, those 2 security guards were completely dismissed. They had absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance. On June 9th, Sloot and the Kaupo brothers were all arrested, every single one of them. The police had very strong suspicions from the beginning that something was very off with their story, and obviously being the last people to have seen her alive, that's a huge subject of interest. So they ended up doing a bunch of phone tapping and monitoring of emails. They did a lot of surveillance of these men, and they had enough suspicion to go ahead and arrest them. And one thing I should state is that in Aruba at the time, I don't know if it's the same now, it's very different over there, their legal system, and they didn't have to have solid evidence to arrest someone. They just had to have suspicions. But in Aruba, it's a little bit different. If there's any sort of small suspicion, they are allowed to arrest someone. But if they can't find anything very soon that does link them, they are supposed to immediately be released. On June 17th, another man ended up arrested, and meanwhile, keep in mind this entire time, they still had the brothers and Sloot detained. And he was arrested based off of more information that Sloot gave, which I find interesting because he so far was the source of many of of the leads in the case. And then on the 22nd, Joran van der Sloot's mother and father were both detained. So that to me also says that they found something that definitely linked Joran to the crime. They questioned his father, who just also happened to be a very, very highly thought of judge in the Aruban government, and they questioned his wife and eventually ended up letting them go. During this time period that all of these different suspects were detained, almost every single one of them changed their story at least one time. One story was that van der Sloot had been dropped off at the beach by the Kaupo brothers with Natalie, and he ended up leaving her at the beach and just walked home. He then said that he was driven home by the Kaupo brothers. There were just a ton of really conflicting stories. And van der Sloot came up with another story saying that he had actually been dropped off at home and the Kaupo brothers drove away with Natalie Holloway in the car. It was a bunch of changes, and it wasn't just little details, it was complete story changes, like absolutely changing everything. That last story ironically came out when the Kaupo brothers started finger pointing at van der Sloot himself, their attorney. Van der Sloot got a little bit of wind of this. He was put more under the microscope than the brothers, and then ironically shortly after that is when he decided to completely take himself out of the equation by stating that he went home and the brothers actually had her and they were the last ones who were with her. And I find that very, very ironic that he switched up his story right as he noticed the attention was put more on him and not just the Kaupo brothers. It got to the point where the Kaupo brothers and van der Sloot were arguing in front of the judge. Like, huge arguments would break out. They would be yelling at each other. They would have to be like detained just to get them to calm down. And if you guys know anything about a courtroom, there needs to be order at all times. And that is not something that you normally see. And they would go at it all because their stories didn't match. The brothers were eventually released, except once again, Joran van der Sloot was put on the front line of suspects and was detained for another 60 days. At this point, the FBI was given all documents to the case. It had already been working very closely with the Aruban government. It was never really just the Aruban government doing things. The FBI and the American police were involved for a lot of this. The family had a lot of people involved in it. It was never really restricted as far as my research took me. So during the course of all of this, Joran van der Sloot and the Kaupo brothers were each arrested 3 to 4 times, and every single time they were released eventually. There was a man named Freddie who was a suspect around the same exact time in another case. A young girl was taken advantage of, photos were taken of her. It was a really gross situation, and ironically enough, it happened around the same time frame that all of this went down with Natalee Holloway. And ironically enough, this man stated that the Kaupo brothers and van der Sloot were involved in it. So that's another thing that ended up bringing them back to the police station. They were arrested again because they just seemed to be connected in this string of assault against women. So the Aruban government kind of got, I don't want to say fed up with the search or the case, but they had spent over $3 million on this case. That was 40% of their government allowance when it came to things like that. And they weren't getting any further with the case. It was a bunch of circles. So on December 18th, 2007, they said that they suspected that she had had some sort of a drug overdose or alcohol poisoning and wandered off and drowned or died, and the case was closed. They claimed to have some sort of knowledge that she did have illicit drugs on her at the time. I'm not sure how they knew that, and I couldn't find that anywhere, but that was the Aruban government's claim, which totally infuriated the family, which to me is pretty obvious, because if anything were to happen to one of my family members, and I knew them very well, and some other government just decided that they probably died from a drug overdose or alcohol poisoning, which was out of their character, I would be pretty upset as well. Then on February 1st, 2008, the absolute unimaginable happened. Video footage of van der Sloot under the influence of marijuana showed him confessing to his crime. He said in the video that Holloway died the morning of her disappearance, that he knew where her body was, that a friend had disposed of her body for him. I mean, he went into pretty graphic detail about it. I will link the video down below. I didn't want to include it in this video because copyright purposes, but I will link a video to it down below. He had this huge, long, elaborate story, which could have been a confession, but at the same time, he was known for making these really elaborate stories like it was nothing. So how do you believe which one of his stories are true? That exact same day that that video was released by the media, the case was immediately reopened. He later said that that confession wasn't true, that instead he sold her into sex trafficking, and that's what happened to her. And then yet again, he retracted those statements. So he made two statements in a very short period of time saying that he saw her die, had her body taken somewhere by a friend, that he sold her into sex slavery. He was just basically confessing all of these horrific crimes, but just because he said he retracted those statements, somehow he wasn't charged for them. I find it very interesting that when the Aruban police spoke on this matter, they said that they had no grounds to arrest him because what he said didn't correlate with a lot of the evidence that they had, which makes zero sense to me, because if I found evidence that was very circumstantial, I would believe someone's confession over that. So the fact that they dismissed it for that reasoning makes me sick to my stomach. And that brings me back to what I said earlier about how the Aruban government will arrest you just off of suspicion. And then all of a sudden they said that they couldn't arrest him because it didn't line up with their evidence. I would think if they could arrest someone off of suspicion alone, they can definitely arrest somebody for claiming to sell them into sex trafficking and that a friend dumped her body somewhere, but apparently that's not how things work. Interestingly enough, the man that actually recorded this confession later came out and said that he expected to get millions from his connection to Vandersloot and Vandersloot's connection to the Holloway case. He ended up being a criminal. He was also an informant, but keep in mind this man who did record him with these confessions was a criminal, and he thought he was going to get something off of it. So if he somehow got him to confess these things without them actually happening, I don't know. This is what I'm saying when I'm telling you this case is so freaking confusing. It is all over the place and so many people are involved. So the parents kept increasing the amount of reward money, and at first it was for any knowledge about what had happened to her that night or her safe return, and then the more the money increased and the longer time passed, and this even like breaks my heart to say, and I try not to cry when I think about my own children, they eventually increased it all the way up to I think over 200,000 or 300,000. I saw so many different figures from all the different times that they increased it for anything that could locate her remains, and that breaks my heart into like millions of tiny little pieces. And what makes this even sick is what Vandersloot did with this information. So in March 2010, Vandersloot contacted Natalie's mother, which I find very interesting because out of both the parents, Dave, her father, kind of did not the most, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way in any way, shape, or form, but he had a lot of the control in the investigation, so I would assume he would go to the father, but I think, once again, Vandersloot was a very manipulative person, and he knew that the most vulnerable person in this situation was going to be the mother. He told her that he could give them information on the location of her body and the circumstances of that night if they gave him an advance on part of this reward. So shortly after, on the 10th of May, money was wired to his bank account, and interestingly enough, all of the information that he had given was almost immediately found to be false. So he was then charged for wire fraud and extortion. You guys, I'm sure, already get the feeling of where this is headed so far. So I thought, being this far into this video and it being so long already, I would stop and say, Joran Vandersloot is a slimy, slimy person. And you guys know that I do not very often put a very extreme opinion on something, but it is very unsettling to see how many times so far, and keep that in mind, this is just so far, that he has admitted to all this, and that he admitted to knowing what happened, and he committed fraud against the family, and, you know, had even videos taken of him admitting it, and somehow this man was just still out there. He was never arrested and kept detained. He was never charged for anything, and that just blows my mind, because just re-talking over all this information that I've been reading on for days makes me sick to my stomach, and you just wait until it keeps going. This is when I really get angry, and this will also lead me to another topic at the very end of this video. But exactly 5 years to the day, on May 30th, 2010, Joran Sloot murdered another woman. He murdered Stephanie Flores Ramirez. She was a 21-year-old, lively, beautiful young woman who had so much life ahead of her and so much potential ahead of her, just like Natalie did. Natalie was so intelligent and so bright. On June 3rd, almost immediately afterwards, Sloot was arrested, and then on June 7th, they got his confession. They pretty much already knew it was him because her body was found in a room that had his name on it. He claimed that they had been having sexual relations at that hotel. He had met her in the casino. Doesn't that sound familiar? And she went on his laptop when he was not in the room, and he had received a message from someone basically threatening to kill him over what he did to Natalee Holloway. And he claimed that it enraged him because it was his private space, which is totally understandable. But then also he said he was upset because the message showed her his link to Natalee Holloway, and that made him angry. And so he strangled her. He hit her first, and then he strangled her. And she was left dead in his hotel room. Almost immediately after being charged with the murder of this girl, he again, this is so frustrating. He again admitted to police that he could lead them straight to Natalee Holloway's body. However, Stephanie Ramirez was killed in Peru, and because of all of the laws there, they were not allowed to get involved in this other investigation that was going on in Aruba. And so he basically confessed to another government, and they couldn't do anything about it again. So eventually, Aruban and Peruvian police got together. They said they would work together to try to figure out what in the heck he was talking about and figure out if he really did know information on Natalee Holloway, because at this point, he had said something multiple times, but once it came down to it, he never actually knew anything. And then shortly after, in September, he again retracted all of his statements and said that he was just angry because Holloway's family had put him through absolute hell for 5 years, and he was trying to get back at them. Then on June 2011, Dave petitioned for Natalee Holloway to be declared dead legally. The mother was completely against this. She was heartbroken. It's understandable. Her parents had split up, I think in 2003, so they were not together at the time. They already had their own issues. Throw in a missing daughter to the mix. I'm sure there was a lot of tension and a lot of emotions really running on high. I feel for them so incredibly deeply. But despite the mother's objection, the judge decided to rule Natalee Holloway as legally dead. That brings us to today and this past month and what's possibly to come in the next week or two, and the entire reason why I did this video. So in August, I'm not exactly sure what day, of 2017, Dave Holloway came forward to the media and claimed that they were about to crack the case wide open. He hired a private investigator in 2016, and this private investigator was told to go through every single bit of this case all over again, see if they missed something, check all of the leads, just see if somehow before they didn't see it the right way, and that ended up leading to a man named Gabriel. So this man had been a roommate and a fairly good friend of Sloot's in 2005 when Natalee disappeared. He claimed that Sloot told him what had happened. He gave an extremely detailed account on it and led them to a body. They found these remains and they sent them off to be tested, and they were in fact proven to be human remains. They were of a younger Caucasian woman of European descent, which would match up with Natalee Holloway. I do want to say that this is not the first time that remains have been found where they have been of a younger Caucasian woman from European descent. This is, I want to say, the 4th time that that's happened, and every single other time it has not been of Natalee Holloway. So the reason I'm speaking on this one is because this wasn't just remains stumbled upon. This was a previous lead from years ago that they decided to follow again that led them straight to this body. This is connected with Vandersloot. This is connected with someone who knew him, someone who lived with him at the time, and this could really crack open the case. However, this is an extremely controversial thing, and I've seen a lot of people angry about this because Dave is in cahoots with people at Oxygen TV, and they are creating, and they've already aired, I think, one episode of the documentary series surrounding Natalee Holloway's disappearance. Now, the reason why people are upset is because if you look on any sort of news outlet, or if you do a quick Google search on Natalee Holloway's remains found, there are multiple sites that say that they are releasing this news in the documentary, and a lot of people are saying that they are making all of this up just to create this really entertaining, interesting documentary series. A lot of people are already angry with the way the mothers treated the situation because she wrote a book about it where she portrayed a lot of things as truth. Now, I'm not saying I've read it. I haven't read it. I don't know what her book says. That's just what I found. But keep in mind, she's a grieving mother. She's very upset. I don't necessarily consider that slander. I consider it her in extreme grieving for her lost child that she may never see again. But a lot of people don't know how to feel about this information because there has been other accounts where bones have been found, and there have been other accounts of places where people have seen her buried. There were multiple accounts of people who saw her being buried by these three men, but they came in long after people already knew about Vandersloot, Deepak, and Satish. There were people who saw them supposedly drive in covering their faces to a really nice resort afterwards. I mean, tons and tons of people have come forward with information, and it has been made up just for attention. So a lot of people are very hesitant to take in what's going on right now because there is so much controversy around everything to begin with. So they took a swab of the inside of the mother's mouth, and they are currently testing the bones DNA to see if this is in fact Natalee Holloway. And the family must be terrified right now. I'm sure they can't sleep. I'm sure they can't eat, because that's how I would feel in this moment. And I read in many different articles that they are so confused as to whether they should be upset if it's not her because they still have no answers, or happy that it is her, even though that means that she was murdered by someone or had something terrible possibly happen to her. I cannot imagine what the family's going through right now, just sitting and waiting for a test result to come back. There's so many things linking Vandersloot to this, and I personally want to share a few character traits of serial killers, because my first thought when I read up on Joran Vandersloot and was kind of analyzing his behavior and his character traits, the first red flag that went off my brain was serial killer. He killed another young girl exactly 5 years later and met her in a very similar way as he met Natalee Holloway. My first thing was, that's a pattern. That is a pattern. And that potentially could point to the fact that he is a serial killer. And he potentially could have killed multiple other people had he not been arrested for this girl's murder. And that brought me back to all of the times that he straight said that he was involved in Natalee Holloway's disappearance, that he could lead to her body, that he knew the circumstances around her death and her disappearance, and somehow he slipped through everyone's fingers so many times. I don't want to take a side here, because you guys know I try to remain neutral. I want you guys to create your own opinions off of my unbiased research that I give to you, but this one is just too much for me. I 1,000,000% think Joran had something to do with it. I don't know how. I can't say that. I'm not a crime scene investigator. I'm not a private investigator. However, in one of his recordings, he described what sounded to me like she had been drugged. He said that he was with her on the beach. He claimed in an interview on Fox that she wanted to have sex with him and he wanted nothing to do with it, and that she got mad, so he decided to leave. You know, all these different parts in his story, he's really trying to make it look like she's done something wrong or she didn't want the help, and he was forced to leave her. Like he said that she stumbled out of the car and didn't want her help. That immediately takes the finger off of him not helping her to she wanted it that way. When they were on the beach in his third story and he was sitting with her, when he was interviewed by Fox, he made it a point to state that she wanted something that he didn't, and so he left because she wanted him to. It was all about her wanting him to do these things, and that to me does not sit well. He went from not knowing much about these situations to creating these very detailed stories, and it wasn't fully detailed. It was like a very vague story with these very strategically placed details that would draw the eye away from him and to somebody else. One character trait of a serial killer is that they enjoy what they did and they enjoy talking about it and telling people about it. And he went on multiple different news shows. He was interviewed by a ton of different people. I find it so messed up because in majority of these interviews, he did claim to have done something to her. And majority of these interviews, he sold her to sex trafficking, or he had sex with her and then dumped her, or, you know, he created all these crazy stories almost as if he was having fun with it. He has the character traits of a sociopath serial killer, and that is plain as day to me. This case was just so emotional and draining for so many people, and I just think it's so crazy that it was possibly Vandersloot and he's just gotten away so many times. Like, there was so many confessions, it blows my mind. So I plan on keeping you guys updated. I am really keeping an eye on it. I have been for about 2 weeks now, just researching more into the case and then seeing what's gonna happen. I'm not watching the TV documentary series, but if you guys would like to see it, it was aired on August 19th, I wanna say, on the Oxygen TV network. I'm not watching it because, like I said, I try to remain extremely unbiased about these things. I don't particularly like watching one side. It's more likely that we will base our own opinions off of whatever side we're watching the most, and I try my absolute best to remain as unbiased as possible. So let me know what you guys think down below, because this rocked my world, honestly. This has been such an insane case, and I'm interested to see if you think Vandersloot had something to do with it. Do you think he should have been arrested already? Do you think that Stephanie Ramirez's death could have been completely prevented? Do you think he's a serial killer? I've just got so many thoughts going through my head, and I am so interested to see what you guys have to say about it. That is it for today's video. Can't wait to see what you guys think about this. I highly suggest anyone to follow this story and read up more on it. I've covered as much as I possibly can without this video not being insanely long. There are so many other details, I got caught up in this for days, like absolute days. So you guys should definitely do your own research on this, definitely form your own opinions, but let me know what you guys think down below. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, it helps me out so much. Check out all of my social media sites. I talk to there all the time, and I've started giving sneak peeks on that day's video on different areas, so go follow all of them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next Saturday. Bye!